Okay, this thing is working. Let's dive right in. We've only got 25 minutes, and we got to answer the question to life, the universe, and everything. Is Bitcoin the answer? If so, what is the question? So that's what we're going to tackle in this panel. I'll just dive right in. I'll start the first question with you, Brandon. We're going to contemplate a few aspects of the future of Bitcoin. And although the rules of Bitcoin don't change, how we play at Bitcoin has been under constant change. Mining, for example, started on CPUs, it moved to GPUs, FPGUs, then little ASICs, then bigger ASICs, then industrial scale ASIC operations. And it now responds to issues like demand response and CO2 sequestering. How do you see the incentives of Bitcoin mining playing out well into the future, and how far out do you care to speculate?
Absolutely. I think the first obvious thing here is that Bitcoin miners and energy infrastructure are going to merge together. They play a symbiotic relationship with each other, so I think it's good for the grid. It makes sense for miners seeking low-cost power. And I think the next thing for miners, let's say 10 years out, roughly, I believe that almost no miners will be competitive unless they have an ancillary revenue stream. Maybe that's selling energy back to the grid in a demand response setting. Maybe it's capturing waste heat or any number of things that we haven't thought about yet. But I think that's mandatory, otherwise you won't be competitive. The second thing when I look far out in the future is more on the energy track. And I see Bitcoin miners playing a role in bootstrapping net new energy assets all around the globe. And the miners bring, essentially they're the buyer of first resort or the anchor tenant in a potential energy project. And that anchor tenant is the difference between getting an energy project off the ground or having it die on the vine. And so that's a very important thing because energy is the master commodity, and all human flourishing, all industry is downstream of energy. And so more is better. And so the Bitcoin miners will produce more energy at a lower cost, more widely distributed across the planet. One cool example is a company called Gridless, who's solving the last mile energy problem in Africa. Essentially, the power producers, they can't bring power to the rural areas because it's not economical. So all the villages suffer without energy. Enter Gridless. They create microgrids, usually on remote hydro. And the Bitcoin miners purchase all that power from day one, so the energy investment makes sense. And simultaneous, the local people around that energy asset can acquire it at low cost. And it might not sound like much for people in this room, but having electricity after dark to charge your phone, to teach your daughter online, to just have enough cell phone minutes or power to call your family on Sunday, that matters to folks in that environment. So a little goes a long way there. And if we look far, far out in the future, if we play out that same incentive, I could see humans bootstrapping energy assets in the middle of nowhere. Let's say we drop a small modular nuclear reactor somewhere. And around that nuclear reactor, now that we have low-cost energy, you can build industry, you can have humans living around that. You can essentially build startup cities in territories that maybe aren't as popular around the world. And that'll give us an experimentation phase to try out new forms of government, new forms of human organization.
Did you want to add your thoughts on this, Pierre?
So I agree with a lot of that. I think that when I look back at when I first started learning about Bitcoin, I thought that Bitcoin mining would have to take up 51% of all the electricity in the world in order for Bitcoin to be secure. So I was, really wrong about that. I've been wrong about a lot of things. The next thing I was wrong about was I thought that transaction fees would have to go up, and that we need to limit the size of blocks in order for transaction fees to go up. And today, if we look at kind of the backlog of transactions waiting to get into the next block, there isn't that fee pressure that has materialized. Some say it will happen, but I think that the reason I was wrong about that prediction is because Bitcoin's technology, the Bitcoin protocol, is going to continue to have improvements that increase the efficiency with which we use Bitcoin. And so that will always be at odds with driving up transaction fees on Bitcoin. So now, updating kind of the prediction, I think that at the end of the day, it really is going to be about what is the value of Bitcoin. Today, we measure that in dollar terms, but we can just think about it in terms of purchasing power relative to the rest of the economy. And that being on one side, where we're pretty bullish, right? We think the value of Bitcoin is going to increase. On the other hand, for Bitcoin miners, every 4 years worth of blocks, every 210,000 blocks, there's a halving. And so their top line BTC revenue gets cut in half. So the key question is, what's going to matter more? Is it going to be the increase in value, or is it going to be the halving? I think in the medium term, the increase in Bitcoin's value is going to continue to outpace the halvings. And it has historically, and I think that'll continue in the medium term. I think in the long term, that will not be the case. Eventually, Bitcoin will reach some 100% adoption, however we want to define that. I think that we're pretty far from that today. I think we're at less than 1% adoption. And so when Bitcoin's at 100% adoption, its value is going to be increasing at the same pace as the overall growth of the economy in terms of its Bitcoin's purchasing power. And these halvings, the last halving will be in the year 2140, and 0 new Bitcoin will be getting added to the ledger. It'll purely be about the transaction fees. And if transaction fees are, continue to reflect kind of the steady state we've been in over the past 10 years of being low, not 0, but being low compared to what people's expectations might be, I think that that will actually represent a sizable Bitcoin mining industry. Because the purchasing power of that transaction fee revenue will still be substantial. So it raises a question of how should we be communicating about Bitcoin's impact on the energy sector, where in the medium term we do think that it's going to dramatically increase. But in the long term, it's not going to be 51% of all electricity use. And it's not going to be some kind of catastrophic ecological disaster that the critics really want to highlight. And we can balance that with the question about the security budget, but I'll let Vijay go next.
Yeah, I should say to start off that I'm not an expert in mining, but the thing I find absolutely fascinating is that Bitcoin is becoming critical to the energy grid. And in the places which have realized this, it is critical to the energy grid. I think the narrative on Bitcoin mining as being environmentally harmful is about to flip, and I think it'll flip big time, and I think it'll flip in the next year. It's not just because BlackRock is coming in. I think it's because Bitcoin is obviously good at doing something that if you care about emissions, you should care about, which is capturing flared gas. And I was speaking to the CEO of a small startup called Giga Energy, and they're going around capturing flared methane. And methane is incredibly harmful to the environment. It's 80 times more harmful than CO2. And with Bitcoin, you can now go capture that energy rather than flaring it, which the rate at which you're destroying the methane is much less than if you capture it for Bitcoin mining. So there is an underlying reality here that Bitcoin will be a tool for helping with emissions, and the narrative, just by the fact that these big companies are coming in and talking about Bitcoin as being helpful to the environment, is going to flip and match that underlying reality of miners are going out there and capturing these emissions so they're not going up into the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's amazing that we're already seeing the Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin fixing energy production, fixing the environmental consequences of energy production, that these aren't just memes, that they connect to reality. Let's get a little deeper then, as we go into the life of the universe and everything. A couple of days ago, there was a separate mining forum, and Max Kaiser had a few things to say about mining. And one of the things he said, which I found really interesting, he said, people buy gold because they're full of fear. People buy Bitcoin because they're full of faith. And Bitcoin seems to be drawing some kind of connection between faith, truth, and optimism in something that allows you to verify essentially every single aspect of it, not requiring any trust. What is the role of faith in Bitcoin and among Bitcoiners? Pierre, why don't you dive into that first?
Yeah, so I think that first we tend to pit faith versus reason as kind of a dichotomy. And I think that's actually not the right dichotomy. I think that the dichotomy is really faith versus nihilism and apathy. And so I actually do think that faith and reason are simpatico. They go hand in hand. And that faith allows us to really, it guides us towards what we should be reasoning about. And even here today, the fact that we're all coming together to talk about Bitcoin, I think that speaks to the faith that people have in Bitcoin, in the sense that it brings folks together beyond just being a technology, being a financial investment. It really is perceived by the Bitcoin community as being a transformative power in the world for the good. And I think that fundamentally is about faith. And we can then, that gives us the motivation to want to understand Bitcoin and go down the rabbit hole. But ultimately, it starts with a firm belief that Bitcoin is good and that it's going to be good for civilization, for humanity as a whole.
Vijay, did you want to add something to this? And Brandon?
Yeah, I like what Pierre said, and I would say that there is not a dichotomy between faith and reason. I would say it's faith based in reason. And I would also say that this is slightly tangential, but Bitcoin and money in general is an intersubjective reality. It's something that has power only if we all believe it has power. But it's not like we just believe it for no reason. Bitcoin has these fundamental advantages as money. So we have faith in Bitcoin, but it's based in reason. And so I do think, I totally agree with Pierre that those two things can be strongly connected.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is if we look out in society today, I think we're at about a 90-year low in trust of our institutions. And so I think there's a premium on honesty and transparency, and Bitcoin obviously embodies those values. And so from a faith perspective, we're essentially shifting our faith away from a small group of old white guys in a room setting monetary policy and shifting that over to math, cryptography, and some sort of a public infrastructure protocol that is Bitcoin. And I think that gives us hope and optimism, especially for young people where it's severely lacking today. And as a species, we're best off when we're optimistic about the future, we're thinking long term, and we can invest in the future with large capital projects.
Great. Let's talk about freedom. We keep hearing that Bitcoin is freedom, or that Bitcoin can free us. What do you think freedom truly is? And beyond a superficial connection to being permissionless, how is Bitcoin really affecting our freedom? Vijay, do you want to talk about this?
So my view of freedom, I think, is based in the American tradition, and I think freedom is ultimately the freedom to escape. And the Puritans escaped the king, the Quakers escaped the Puritans, the Mormons escaped the Quakers. People always had the freedom in America to leave and find a place that matched their values. I think that's something that Bitcoin allows more than ever, is freedom to leave, because it gives you the power to take that which is most important in your life, which is the fruits of your labor, what you've built up over time through your hard work and the work of your family, and take it somewhere else if where you are doesn't match what you want in life. And I always think of the example of the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, who fled the Nazis across Europe and was almost caught by them, but without any of the savings he had built up as one of the great economists in Europe. And he landed in America with just the shirt on his back and had to restart his life as a lowly economist in a not very good university because he didn't have any choice. He didn't have the fruits of his labor that he had built up over time. And I think, what would it have been like if he had Bitcoin and he didn't need to worry about carrying his wealth? His wealth was in his head. He had like 12 words in his head, and he could find a new place and restart his life with the value that he had built up. So for me, freedom is ultimately the freedom to escape, to find the place that matches your values.
I think that along those lines, freedom is about having the free will to do good. And the converse of that in the fiat system is where you're coerced into doing bad. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you're holding dollars, you're indirectly financing a relentless war machine, a government whose policies are antithetical to human flourishing. And so in the fiat system, your time and energy and your wealth is channeled into doing things that are bad. Furthermore, with inflation, you're incentivized to engage in mindless consumerism because you need to drain your bank account before it's worthless. And so you're out there living paycheck to paycheck, just buying plastic junk and really filling your life with materialism. which is antithetical from my perspective to filling your life with good along more spiritual grounds. And furthermore, you're compelled into bad investments, whether it's real estate or junk bonds, et cetera, that you wouldn't have to do if you have a proper savings vehicle like Bitcoin. So I don't see freedom as an end in of itself, but it's a necessary part of doing good. And that's why I think that Bitcoin has tremendous moral value in that regard.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, I think Bitcoin, from a freedom perspective, to me means it's a universal property rights system for 8 billion people. It doesn't matter what country you're in, the capital controls, the regime. It doesn't matter how old you are, if you have an ID. It doesn't matter if you're a persona non grata or if your opinion doesn't fit the zeitgeist. You can contribute globally in commerce on a single economic language that everyone speaks and no one can prevent you from accessing. So from my perspective, it essentially brings human capital online that's currently stuck in an environment where they can't contribute globally, they don't have savings, they don't have a way to invest, or they can't bring their ideas to market. And so on the individual level, everyone's free to pursue their own economic interests. And at the species level, we're all going to benefit here because there's geniuses stuck right now under some authoritarian regime with an idea that will change the world, and they're not able to bring it to market. Imagine Mozart being born before the piano, how much we would lose from that. And I see Bitcoin doing the same thing for individuals today.
Nice. Hear it. All right, a question to start with you, Brandon. It's a common expression in the Bitcoin community that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. How does Bitcoin change people? And does the way Bitcoin change people ultimately change Bitcoin?
That's a deep one. So I think the adage is true. Bitcoin changes us way more than we change the system. But when I think about this question, it's changed me personally. Many other Bitcoiners can report that. But what I'm worried about is that simply just a reflection of us being the early adopters? Right? If we fast forward 20 years from now, are people going to go to a money conference people don't go to internet conferences anymore? So it's my belief actually that the more you invest in Bitcoin, the more you participate in this thing, the more it will change you. And so I think we're sort of in this honeymoon stage when it's radically changing us one by one. However, if we look in the long term, I think it will be a much more subtle change. Similar to the way that fiat money today, no one really notices it day to day. Why are we in a consumer society? Why are our morals eroding? Why are infrastructure eroding? The average person does not associate that with fiat money, and I think the same will be true in some future state if we're on a sound money or some sort of Bitcoin standard. We'll just think long term, we'll raise families, and we'll be a better version of our species. Now, will that allow us to then change Bitcoin? I don't think so. I think the primary value of this thing is that it's hard to change. And so it's not 21 million, it's none of these things. It's the fact that humans can't meddle with it. And historically, the reason why monies fail, either technological advancements or, more commonly, human greed takes over. Print money because the barbarians are at the gate, and eventually trust erodes, the money's broken, and we move on. And so the fact that it can't be changed is fundamental here.
I think a big source of change that I've seen that I think is really related to Bitcoin's ability to dematerialize value. So we're able to store our value in 12 words or 24 words. And that just has never been the case throughout human history. Value has always been stored either in third-party institutions, right, or in physical assets like a plant, a factory, or in gold, right? And so being able to dematerialize value, I think that does have a transformative effect on people at a fundamental level, that now they no longer attach so much value to what they see, to this material reality, and they're able to perhaps access a layer of spirituality that was blocked off by the materialism before. And I do think that does change people tremendously.
I think Bitcoin has this ability to extend people's time horizon. I've seen this over and over again, where people get into Bitcoin and they realize that there's only going to be 21 million of them, and their mindset goes from frittering away their savings by spending or investing in things because they're worried about inflation and their savings diminishing over time, to I want to get as much of this as possible. What can I put aside? What purchases do I not really need so I can get more Bitcoin? And it extends people's time horizon. The only thing I think extends people's time horizon as much as buying Bitcoin is having children. So I would encourage everyone to have as many children as you can. That will extend your thoughts about the future, because you want the world to be a better place, and you'll be thinking about, how do I produce a good life for my kids? And you'll put things away in the present so that they can benefit in the future. And Bitcoin has that same effect on people. I've seen it so many times.
I think we're probably down to our last question, just looking at the clock up here. So I'm going to ask, how far into the future do you think humanity will be using Bitcoin? Will it be a standard that lasts for 50 to 100 years like fiat? Will it be 500 to 2,000 years like gold? Or is it going to be something that lasts far, far longer?
I personally call the period that we live in right now the fiat money interregnum. It's the short historical anomaly, and it is an anomaly between two hard money periods of existence. The gold standard that existed, for thousands and thousands of years. This short fiat money interregnum, which is a horrible experiment that we're the guinea pigs of this experiment. And hopefully our children and our grandchildren will go back to a sound money standard. And enjoy that for the next 5,000 or more years.
I think forever. I mean, we can get into a cosmological argument of, is there going to be an end of time? But I think that ultimately Bitcoin's properties are such that they minimize uncertainty, and by being open source, if there's ever an opportunity to further minimize uncertainty, Bitcoin will certainly be able to adapt and integrate that. And so I do think that Bitcoin will, is kind of the long-term solution to the question of money, and then we can perhaps think about what different forms Bitcoin will take. If it's talking about Bitcoin in space, maybe we only have things like open dimes where you do actually have to physically move the private key rather than trying to broadcast the transaction back to Earth because you're too far from Earth. So those are interesting science fiction questions, but today, when we look at the fundamentals of the Bitcoin system and the software engineering, there's zero doubt in my mind that this can last forever.
Bullish. Satoshi had a quote, is something like, you can't solve political problems with cryptography, but hopefully Bitcoin will give us a leg up in the arms race of freedom and sovereignty against an encroaching state. And so in that sense, Satoshi sounds a little more bearish than all of us here, but he didn't have much purchase on how Bitcoin would react in the real world when he said that quote. So we're exceeding Satoshi's expectations. And I do think Bitcoin has a chance to be the first 5,000-year money, or maybe survive the heat death of the universe. We'll have to see. But I think the two reasons money fail, as I mentioned earlier, are technological advancements and human greed or co-option. And from the technology side, Bitcoin can integrate new technologies if absolutely necessary, right? That's kind of opposed to you can't change it, but if existential, we can upgrade Bitcoin as needed, and so that sort of solves any future technological advancements superseding Bitcoin. And then, like mentioned, you can't change this thing, so it's essentially out of the reach of humans. We can't trust ourselves with the money printer, so Satoshi took it out of our hands in the same way that Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it back to the people. Satoshi stole money out of the central bankers and gave it back to the people.
I think that about wraps up our time. So I want to thank you guys for all your thoughts here today and all the thoughts you continue to put into the Bitcoin ecosystem as we go forward and discover whether or not Bitcoin is indeed the answer to life, the universe, and everything. To everyone in the audience, there's an amazing presentation coming up. I know everyone on this panel wants to get into the audience to see what's up next, so stay tuned. Thank you.
Oh, hi. Do you have your ticket to the next Pacific Bitcoin Festival? Join us as we shine a light on the best of Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. Visit pacificbitcoin.com for the best deal on tickets now.